Ha. Hello, Tom. I see you in the chat there. And hello to everybody else as well. I think we'll just go straight ahead since this is a neat online platform where people can walk in the room and walk back out the room without any disturbances whatsoever. My name is Christopher Torgelson. I work currently from France for the best Drupal agency in Ireland. They're called Enertech, and you can come and have a look at us at enertech.com. My Twitter handle is Bedlam Hotel for reasons that I probably can't adequately explain. I've pinned the slides for this presentation there on Twitter. So if you like them and want to have another look at them, or if for any reason you don't make it through the whole presentation and you want to, you can go and find them there. So this is about robots. And to begin with, so there are good robots. I don't think this is too controversial, but you might wonder what I'm getting at when I say robots. And for the purposes of this, I'm talking about automated scripts of the sort that we use for linting code, testing code, compiling code, deploying application code, or for provisioning infrastructure, all these things. And these tools, these scripts, these robots, when they work, they're the good robots. But that's not the whole story. If it was, we'd be done. This would be it. But there are bad robots too. Now, they didn't start bad. The bad ones are the ones in my rubric here. They're the ones that are, for whatever reason, they're slow, difficult to use, even dangerous to use in terms of information security. They cause exactly, John Hare there, nature versus nurture. It's probably our fault is the takeaway from this. But these are there are bad robots, and as some of you I guess are anticipating in the chat there, bad robots cause problems. I haven't ever quite had this happen, but disasters. You can make disasters happen if you don't get the robots right, if you don't get the automated stuff right. And the reason for this is because robots are great. They work fast. They have a work ethic like nobody else. And again, this is our fault. It's not their fault. And if we don't account for their sort of stupidity, their innate dumbness, they'll get us. And before we get into the meat of this, I just want to say that I have sort of three assumptions here going in. One is that development and deployment automation, they tend to transcend individual projects. For example, we want to or try to use, hello Petter, sorry, it's another beer I owe you. We try to reuse tools such as GitHub Actions, GitLab CI pipelines, NPM build scripts or build pipelines, and Composer scripts, Jenkins jobs, all of these sort of like little bits of automation that we assemble. We do or try to reuse them from project to project. So that's assumption number one, is that we are at least trying to do that. Second is that these days developers and agencies tend to Vim scripts. Good thought. I spend all my time in Vim and I never even thought of that. The second assumption is that developers and agencies stay involved for more or less the whole project lifecycle. We don't just kick them out the door anymore like we did when they were simple HTML documents where you could put them on a server, and that would a shared hosting server, and that would pretty much end your sort of involvement. And the third assumption, sort of obvious, but I thought I should make it clear, is that much of our automation code runs unsupervised. So this, what we're going to talk about here is how not to do it. This is automation worst practices in this case. So I'm going to list a bunch of things. I'm just going to talk about a whole bunch of things here. And even though I've called them worst practices, not all of them are terrible on the face. They're not inherently bad in most cases. But if you recognize a lot of these, if you know, I go through 25 slides and you think for each one, yeah, I know that one, and I know that one, I know that one too, then there may be opportunities for improvement in the project or in the automation or in their sort of conjunction. And when I was thinking about this, I thought, now if only there was a way that we could measure the quality of automation in a presentation. Somebody asked for permission to heckle. I have to shut that down. No, feel free. It's chat. I can always turn the chat off. If only there were a way to measure in a presentation for you guys, for all you people, for the people in the audience, if there was only a way to measure the quality of automation. And so what I came up with is bingo. So if you go over to this URL here, this awpbingo.com, then, sorry, I can't see both monitors at the same time here. There we go. You'll get something like this, just a simple bingo card. It'll give you a set of randomized numbers. You can sort of click on them, get a bingo or not. There are no prizes. And the way this works is, as I go through the slides, each one is going to have a number at the top right in red. And if you recognize this and you see the number on your card, you can just then click it. If you are extra brave, you can tell us about it at the end. So going on to the first one, in order to sort of get the real sort of scoop on the worst practices, I actually asked some robots. So I've got 5 robots that I've asked questions of, and I'm keeping their names confidential, but we've got pictures. So this is robot number 1, and his sort of principle, or the principle that he likes to live by, which is do repeat yourself. And I've lost my notes. Here we go. So do repeat yourself. You might think that this is sort of contrary to the whole spirit of automation, and you would be right. What we're aiming for by automating things in the first place is to reduce our effort and reduce, probably reduce the duplication of code and configuration between relevantly similar projects. So again, there's not quite an imperative, but there's we'd like to reuse these things. We build them once, we'd like to reuse them between projects. And just to give a simple example, which I've already alluded to, but an NPM-based theme pipeline that we might use on a Drupal site for compiling Sass into CSS and optimizing images, all these sort of little tasks that have to get done in order to prepare the theme for sort of use. These things, they're almost identical. If you can find, you can probably not really find any very great differences between any typical Drupal theme and any other typical Drupal theme in terms of what things need to be done to them. There'll be minor differences, but mostly there'll be configuration, like sort of paths where the images live, perhaps, and small things. But we're going to want to do things like optimize images, compile Sass, maybe minify and concatenate JavaScript if we feel like it. You know, typical sort of tasks. So robot number one here has more details for us about how we can repeat ourselves if we're trying to do things badly. And the first one is the config that I'm talking about. And again, these are not the application code, but sort of the parameters we pass into it to specify sort of where it works, on what it works, and maybe when it works, for example. And as I've said, there's not a lot of reasons, you might think, for similar projects to not share their non-private configurations. That was a lot of nots. To simplify that, similar projects probably ought to share their configuration if they're using like similar tools within them. So just to give another example of the kind of thing I'm talking about, in a slightly different domain, the configuration of the server infrastructure that we use to run Drupal on projects with similar requirements, the server infrastructure, can be automated with tools like Ansible that provide shared default configurations and then leave the door open for overrides. So just an example to the example is PHP modules. They tend to be awfully similar between Drupal sites, and you might need the odd sort of extra module. Maybe one site, I don't know, maybe one site uses, I've lost them all in my head at the moment. Maybe one site has a particular need for sort of an XML parser and another doesn't. But the thing we want to do in these cases is provide the basic list, use that everywhere we can, and where we need extras, just override, or even better, just add to the basic list so that there's very little that is different between the different projects. But if you're really trying to repeat yourself, there's more. We have more options than just configuration. So we can configure. We can duplicate our code too. By the way, I've forgotten to mention, the numbers are at the top there, top right corner, as I meant to mention earlier. But the code as well as the config is the sort of thing we can duplicate if we're really trying to sort of make a mess. And again, this is where we do very similar identical tasks. And this is, of course, why Drupal exists. But in addition, the Drupal module ecosystem, or the Composer package ecosystem, or the NPM package ecosystem. And if we want to not follow this duplicate yourself pattern, we should be trying where we can to reuse code. But we see examples that get worse. So for example, a thing that happens that I've seen happen is where it will happen that a project will start its automation from scratch every time, or sorry, each project will start from scratch with its automation. And I've got two sort of examples of this. One I've seen very often, the other I've seen a little bit less often, but they do come up. And one, again, is sort of in the context of theming, where you might set up a whole gulp pipeline to do this sort of whole set of again, minification, compiling, image processing, and so on, and just copy it from an existing project into a new project, then change all the paths and everything that's different about the new project from the old project. And that's your configuration out the window. And then, you'll probably find, well, you've got one extra task or one different task. Maybe maybe you're using a lot of SVG icons in the current theme or something, and you need to optimize the SVG icons independently of your PNGs and JPEGs and whatnot. So you add another step into your gulp pipeline. And we've got, at this point, a completely new automation pipeline, 100% new. But it's so like the other one that all that's really new is the technical debt that you've added to the new project at the beginning, by the way, at the beginning. I mentioned there were two examples. Another one that I've seen is with Ansible. It's for me at least, it took me a while to learn how with Ansible to share the configuration like I mentioned earlier. And if you don't do that, then you have few options except to start over every time. So for example, if I'm provisioning a server, I would just have to go and get a set of PHP modules from the last time I did it, paste it into the new playbook, and just go with that. And so now I've got two things. They're probably almost identical, but they're not quite the same. And we've sort of broken the tool, which is designed to work basically by sharing config and overriding only little bits of config where necessary. So that's the do repeat yourself robot. So, oh, sorry, I forgot. We have one last thing that he suggests, and that is to keep your automation scripts anywhere but in the code repositories. And this is something, the place I'm most used to seeing this is in Jenkins, where there's this nice little text box where you can just, I've got a three-line bash script that I need to deploy something. And, I can just paste it in here, can't I? But then you do that for 25 projects and you have, 25 slightly different bash scripts. Sometimes, maybe if you're deploying Drupal, maybe the drush updb and drush cr are in the different orders, or CIM comes before updb for some reason, and it sort of becomes a mess. And aside from that, the mess is that it's repeated. The initial mess is that it's repeated, but the additional mess that you get out of that is that you can't find these things because they don't live with the project that they belong to. So that's robot number one. So moving on from the sort of duplication and repetition, let's go talk to robot number two about secrets. And according to this guy, secrets don't have to be secret. So it's sort of obvious, it's trivial that in an automated pipeline, robots, the scripts, they're going to need access to secrets. They might be private keys that have to be deployed to servers, API keys that we need to sort of make use of services, credentials that we might need to use Amazon S3, or credentials that we need to get into environment variables for database credentials or something for Drupal to use, for example. Now, this is all necessary, it's all sort of obvious, but the tricky thing is we actually have to keep them secret. And this is, so a thing that we see at times is this one, and this one is this is the sole item in the slide deck and in the bingo card. If you've got this going on, you could probably just call it bingo now, even if you've only got 1 or 2 squares, because this is bad. This is the only one that should never, ever happen. The other ones, there's edge cases, there's reasons for doing them, differently from what I'm talking about here. This one is just bad. And I've seen, various kinds of credentials. They'll show up somewhere unencrypted. And it's unnecessary because virtually any tool you can think of provides some way of sort of handling a secret safely. Like GitLab, GitHub, Jenkins all provide a way for you to sort of enter an environment variable that is either going to be impossible or very, very difficult to access outside of your build pipeline. It's also, it's obviously unsafe, because if it's in your repository and your repository gets into any sort of the wrong hands whatsoever, then the secrets aren't secret anymore. At least you have to assume that they're not. And given that a lot of sites are still deployed by one way or another getting onto a server and running git pull, which brings the repository down, if you have unencrypted secrets in there, then they're not secret. Sorry, they're not secret if anything happens to that code base. And you have to consider in this respect, who has access to the server, because all those people have access to whatever the secret is. It's also, this one, it's suspicious. So if you see this in a code base, you have to ask why it's unencrypted. And there's two kinds of reasons, I think, that why this happens most of all. And the first is that it's the only place the secrets exist. So if somebody needs them, for example, if there's a database password stuck in a repository somewhere, that may be the only place the developers have to go get it in case they need it. So that, for example, they have to write a settings.local.php file or something, because that's not in the automation. That's actually, we use that password everywhere, Kevin. That's the best one. It solves a lot of these problems. And the second reason, I've forgotten what the second reason was. I'll come back to it if it comes back to me. So there's another way we can mishandle secrets. And this one here was the one example that you should never, never, never do. The next one is one that might be bad. It might be something you haven't got a choice about doing, but it's something, if you are doing it, make sure you've got a good reason. So I say reuse. When I say reuse password secrets and private keys, I mean, if the thing shows up in more than one place. And with things like keys and API keys and stuff, if you've got sort of server infrastructure that has multiple machines, you may need all this stuff on all of them. But if you don't need that, and if you find that, for example, you have different projects and those different projects share a database password or something, that's, well, again, it's unnecessary and it should be easy to fix. And it should probably be done away with. So there's only a limited number of ways that you can mishandle secrets, I hope. So let's go to robot number 3, and he's maybe the laziest of the robots, and he just says, always use the most convenient tool. So you'll notice it's not always use the best tool, it's just always use the most convenient tool. And I did this to myself in a rather unproductive way on a personal project recently. I spent half a day or more building a build script for just a simple personal project. But I did it in Bash because I really, really didn't want to add a Python dependency to the project when that was sort of the language that was well suited to the job I was doing. So I spent this day, and later I rewrote it in Python. I don't know, by the end of it, I just felt stupid. And I fell victim to basically this problem. Like, it was just the most convenient. Bash is everywhere. So I was able to just, get the initial parts of it done in minutes, and then it took all day, and then it was kind of lousy, and I had to redo it. Oops. So going into his details, this is everybody's favorite. I see Mark Dorison in the chat there. He'll probably comment any minute now that I do this with Ansible. I haven't yet tried to build a Drupal module that uses Ansible, but it could happen. In any case, there's no tool that handles every job equally well. So we need to, when we're building our robots and our automation, we need to pick the right ones within reason, and not just try and use, the tool, whatever the tool happens to be. For example, Drupal projects, of course, they're PHP based, right, principally, and we have these nice sort of ways of building stuff in an automated way with Composer now, and Composer packages are super convenient. John Van Dyke, I'd like to hear about that. So I've toyed with the idea of building the theme pipeline for Drupal sites with Robo, which is sort of an automation, a PHP-based automation tool. And as with my bash build script there, that turns out to be a fairly dumb idea. It's not very practical. It's nowhere near as useful as the sort of actually proper tool, which would be in the theme context, which would be NPM. So having ruled out one tool, using one tool for every task, there is, of course, use a different tool for every task. And all this gets you is technical debt. If we use like every tool in the shed like this, it causes more problems than it solves. The thing about this slide that I particularly liked about the image, rather, is how many of these tools are actually the same tool as each other, or close enough to being the same tool that it probably isn't really necessary to have both in the toolbox. And the kind of thing I'm talking about, and again, so I'm about to describe a pipeline, and every single piece in this pipeline is good at its job. It's like arguably one of the best or one of the best tools in the job, but the whole string of them together, when I actually write it down, looks suspicious. Even though we got a bingo already. Good job. I hope those are all ones that you've fixed, right? Sorry, it looks suspicious just seeing all of these different tools together. And the thing I'm describing is, so a pipeline that's driven by a merge into the main branch on GitHub or GitLab or somewhere, which then triggers a Jenkins job, which then runs Ansible job, an Ansible playbook rather, which does things with Bash to run Composer and Composer scripts that use Robo, and then also uses NPM for the scripts. I actually don't know that this particular thing I'm thinking of is a problem, but it's got enough pieces to it that, especially given NPM is one of them, which is probably the single most aggravating tool out of all that set. It makes me wonder if it couldn't be improved on in some way, optimized some way to just sort of cut down on the number of moving parts. So that basically using too many tools, using not enough tools, not picking the right tools. That's sort of how we can go wrong in that way. So if we now move on to robot number 4, we get into a different area. And here I want to say automate with feeling. That's his advice. And And this thing it doesn't necessarily start with the automation, the problem here. But a lot of processes that I've seen, they have rules and sort of procedures based on largely on how the participants feel about what's going to be automated. Partly it's about the seriousness of the task and what are the potential consequences. And they're often not very evidence based. But these sort of feelings, they get reflected in how the automation gets built. And the simple example that I was able to think of was on Debian or Ubuntu servers, the unattended upgrades tool will, as its name implies, upgrade packages for you without you having to approve them. And it can reboot the servers for you. And what I find is that everybody likes the first part, the automated upgrading of packages, and the reception of the idea of a script that will automatically reboot servers when it feels like it is mixed. The reception is quite mixed. Not everybody loves the idea. But we can go on to some sort of specifics, such as learning to fear failure. And again, this is perhaps I'm a bit hard on people here, because this is, of course, completely reasonable. We don't want our stuff to go down in flames. But one of the goals of automation is to minimize the effort, but not just the effort, the importance of any given task that we're automating. So we want any single thing that we automate to be so really so simple and trivial that we can just trust it to run. And I think probably the best example of this that I can think of is how it's so common now, I'm tempted to say it's almost ubiquitous, to deploy websites on merging into the main or say production branch. And doing that used to be fairly time consuming, and it used to be fairly high stakes when we had to do it by hand. But it's become, as I say, it's become almost trivial. And we're not, for the most part, we're not terribly worried about it failing. And partly that's because most of the ways that it can fail by merging in an already tested bit of code are pretty minor. I know everybody will suddenly start flooding me with disasters they've had that way. Sorry, I'm reading the chat. The sort of ways it can fail in that respect are more minor than they used to be, let's say, and they're becoming sort of more so all the time. But there's another aspect to this too, which is that when you're automating things, sort of failure is an opportunity. So if, and again, you don't want this opportunity to happen in production, I realize this. Hey, deployments at 2 a.m. unattended. Awesome. So if when something fails in automation, that's information. So, and it's information that we can probably use if we have access to the information. More on that later. And it's what we should be. It's almost what we should be hoping for. We want these things to fail in all the possible ways, so that, you know, after we've had time to refine some of these automated pipelines, I'm just going to quote Kevin Quillen: "Failure helps fix the problems too, so you have time to diagnose." That's it. It's a way of sort of being able to refine the process, and that's all to the good. So I should pick up the pace slightly. We have to learn to fear the build. I'll go a little quicker here. And this is, I think, something that it comes up in the context of people whose experience with deploying stuff is git pull. And once you start introducing stuff like sort of maybe pulling Composer, for example, from repositories, or building the NPM part of the theme at compile time, that stuff can look frightening. And again, it looks like a place where it could all go wrong, and people worry about it. This one, I'm sure everybody here is familiar with this one, where clients, they deploy nervously, like every time it's a big deal. It often takes a long time, and it's rigorously scheduled, and often happens very infrequently. And this is a road. When I wrote the notes, I didn't have the slide image yet, but I guess it is a road to disaster. And the best way I can explain this is just to anybody who's ever upgraded Composer packages by hand will understand what the robots have to go through. If you are upgrading 2 Composer packages, that's fine, it's gonna work. It's almost sure to work. But if you're updating like 25 Composer packages or 30 Composer packages because you've done nothing, you haven't done a deployment for 2 months, it's risky. And if it fails, you're not gonna have any idea what happened. It's gonna be very difficult to sort of figure out. This is my favorite method, and this is a thing that tends to happen when 2 pieces of deployment either meet but don't quite meet, or when one deployment pipeline just sort of dead ends, and the rest of it has to be done by hand. So, for example, when you've got a deployment pipeline that will deploy a Drupal site, but if it fails, you've got no way but manual to roll it back. So you've actually got to go and pull a database backup, pull a file system backup, or sort of manually pull down from Git from the last tag or the last release or something. And it's artistic. But that's a place that the automation has failed because you're involving sort of the humans. We want to be out of this process as much as we can. Anyway, carrying on to the last robot, we've got a few more things that he recommends, and this is all about protecting information and not doing it running everything on a need-to-know basis. The first is sort of one of my favorites. Obscurity. There seems to be sometimes we are inclined to not follow the nicer coding standards when we're writing the automated stuff. By the way, don't run this on your system. I don't think it will take any of them down these days, but it might. And just using this as a jumping off point in Bash, for example, the way that we might resist this tendency is to use the long form flags instead of the short ones. Oh, I thought I saw another bingo in the chat. And so this one is slightly harder to explain, but the robots and the humans both work on the same code bases. They both sometimes need to do the same jobs. So for example, we need to run the sort of usual Drupal deployment stuff where we, clear the cache, update the database, probably clear the cache again, import config, and whatever. And you can type all that, it's not that hard. But we also have these nice deployment scripts where Composer might have a script in it that's doing that, or there might be a chunk of Ansible that's doing that. But what is useful is if you take encapsulate that little bit of the script or of deployment, take it out, put it somewhere where a developer can use it, and then get the automation to access it in the same way. Another example of this kind of thing is also an NPM thing, where again, in building and compiling a theme, you often have like an npm, say, watch commands that runs a bunch of things in response to files in the file system changing. But the pipelines that do this are often written in such a way that you have no access to running the individual task. So you may not have a way to easily compile, for example, only the CSS without also linting the JavaScript and minifying it. And that sort of kind of privileges the robots over the actual developers, and we should be cooperating in this respect. Going on. Limiting access to deployment info is, here I'm talking about what happens. So I was involved with a project where I could trigger an automated pipeline, but I had no way of finding out what was happening inside it. I couldn't even find out what the tasks were. I didn't have access to the code base that it was using, and I didn't have sufficient access to the CI tool to find out what it was doing. And I had to actually sort of quiz my sort of fellows on the client end to find out what was going on. So I had literally no way of debugging it. And I didn't mention this, but I'm joining you here from France, so I'm 6 to 9 hours removed from a lot of the people that I work with and have worked with. So the round trip on questions like this can be kind of awkward. Next up, so that's what's happening. It's okay to limit access to error and activity logs. So this don't never give them access to the logs. We don't want to be able to find out what happened. And so this is, again, same project. I had the same issue as with the what's happening with the what actually happened. I'd see that my deployment failed, but I had no way of determining what it was that had actually gone on. Just trying to wrap up. So this seems to be the opposite superficially. I'm saying report everything, but that's reporting absolutely everything. Oh, sorry, I'll back up one step. When I say report, I'm talking about reporting out to tools like Slack, for example. So sending a message when a job fails, sending a message when a job returns to normal, for example. But if you report everything, it's just as good as reporting nothing, because everybody will mute the channel and leave. And they'll never, ever find out what happened. And even if they look at the channel, there'll be so much noise in it that they'll never be able to pick out the sort of important details. This is, of course, just the face to that coin. If we don't report anything, what can happen is that certain types of automation can fail as a result of just not having anything being reported at all. Or sorry, can fail not because of having nothing reported, but they fail and then don't report and nobody finds out. We had some kind of server monitoring, I forget what it was, that was set up using an Ansible job, which failed for months and nobody found out until one day the thing that it was checking to guard against happened. And we're like, why didn't we find out about this? And it was this. Near the very end, second last, everybody know what idempotence is? If they don't, it's like the mathematical property of that you see when you multiply something by 1, which is to say that it's not changed. Some tools like Ansible, they try to work this way, and if you write the playbooks and tools well, they will not do anything if that thing is already in the correct configuration. And there's a second portion to that, which is that you can run an Ansible playbook in a check mode, and it will report correctly if there's anything that needs to change without actually changing it. So that's actually, it's a way of doing a sort of low-level test to find out if your configuration is drifting, but without actually needing to, or without necessarily needing to do the change. Again, if we're nervous about it, we might not want to do it. Yes, thank you, Benji Fisher. Doing it twice has the same effect as doing it once. Lastly, very last one, we tested the application. We don't need to test the robots. I'm just going to say that's false. And as I'm on the hour, I guess I have to wrap up. I did mean to take questions. If anybody has questions, I'm around. You can try to get them talked about. And that's what I got. And just once again, oops. The slides for this, if you're interested in them, yeah. If I can ever get back to the start. Possibly I never can. Yeah. Anyway, they are at Bedlam Hotel is who I am on Twitter. So that's Bedlam, B-E-D-L-A-M. Yeah, holy cow, that's crazy pants. Yeah, I don't know what's going on there. I'm going to leave it be. Yeah, thank you, Disco, exactly. If anybody has any questions for right now, I can try. I don't know how exactly this room kicks us out. Oh, Anne, I'm sorry that you didn't get a bingo. I tried to make it easy. There were 25 slides and 24 squares that matched the slides. So. On the other hand, if you didn't get one, I think you could probably congratulate yourself. So. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Nicole. As I say, the slides are pinned there and will be for a while. So. And I guess that's a wrap. So thank you everybody for coming. And I will try and see you around in the parts of the conference that are in my time zone.